Greetings, listeners. You're tuning in to Sinister Soup, an audio imprint of Grendel Press for lovers of everything dark and delicious. I'm your host, Clay Vermolum. We hope you enjoy today's story and remember to stay tuned afterwards for a featured interview with the author. See you on the other side. Show Yourself by Edward Serken. Port Shea wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect to talk to the dead. A quaint coastal town, sure, but Carol Hester felt stiff and restless after 3 hours in the car. She and Nate arrived at the hotel, showered, grabbed something from the lobby buffet, and headed to the beach. There, a sizable crowd had gathered before a wooden makeshift stage, and a Billy Joel tune played out from the speakers on either side of the platform. Moonlight striped the beach, turning partiers young and old into capering shadows on the ground. Others milled about, drinking bottled beers and sodas sold at kiosks. Families strolled by. A soft breeze brought an earthy smell of wet sand and brine. Neon green jacketed men walked the perimeter with flashlights where the sea snails would arrive. A warped, pocked sign stood near the dunes. "Please take nothing from the beach." The words beneath were almost unreadable under layers of graffiti, but one caution stood out in aged red marker. "Don't listen." Carol spread out the beach blanket and sat down. She gazed at the ocean, her eyes on the dark waves crashing into foam, and asked, "Do you think it was an accident, Nate?" "Di had her troubles," Nate said, grasping her shoulder and leaning in close enough that Carol thought he might want a kiss. "We may know tonight," he added. "Then we'll both have what we want." He fished a piece of notepaper from his pocket and placed it in her hand. "Remember when Scout died? She moped around the house for months when she was 5. She had trouble letting go of that dog, and when her grades slipped a bit before she..." Carol turned to him. "We tried, didn't we?" asked Nate. "We did," she said, and looked away, at the note he had given her. "Hold the shell to your ear around midnight, not a minute after. Shells must be empty, spirals have the most power." She looked up. "What is this?" "Guidance from Mel. People who achieved the most success did these things." He held his breath for a moment before releasing it. "Conditions haven't been like this in years. They don't always appear, but a blue moon almost guarantees they'll show up. The warm weather, too, is perfect. The moon affects their makeup, bringing them up or waking them, locals say." Carol looked down again, back to the note. "Think of who you want to hear from and what you want to tell them. Say their full name. And vaguely, make your need strong." Mel had informed Nate that the snails could be considered psychopomps, creatures linked to the afterworld, serving as escorts like the ferryman or Anubis. When they shuffled off their mortal coils, or in this case, their shells, they left traces that opened a door. The door. Absolutely bonkers. As Carol looked around at the crowd, she could see it was a lucrative insanity. There were stories, many stories, some good while others left questions. Some folks tried the shells and never woke up, while others did, but never spoke again. Nate, of course, focused on the successes. He hoarded them, showing Carol internet postings like the wife who contacted her husband, an Afghanistan war casualty, to say her goodbyes. Something robbed from her since she was a world away when he was shot. Then there was the adult son barred from the hospital during the pandemic who missed his father's passing from COVID. He spoke to his parents through the shell and gained closure. And then there were the children, thrown at Carol in streams of copied and pasted comments from message boards. Dead children came to speak to their parents once more. She didn't read those. They hurt too much, though she told Nate she did. "Are you okay?" Nate knew how she felt about their chances of reaching Diane after a year of suffering crazies and frauds. Even if they came highly recommended or were advertised on Sight Unseen, the paranormal website Nate ran with his college buddy Mel Carver, their credibility remained questionable. I'm here, she said, reluctant to lie, as honesty was the bedrock of their 28-year marriage. But this is the last time. Carol pulled him to her. I need to hear you say it. Nate raked hands through his remaining red curls. This'll be the last time. Thank you. She brought that hand to her lips as she snuggled closer to him, sitting on the blanket. Over the years, the advertisers and writers for Sight Unseen had grown close to her husband despite her misgivings as the family's skeptic. Carol had gone along for Nate's sake, watching him arrange crystals, light the candles, and join him in the circles, hoping to summon their daughter. Early on, Carol wanted to be proven wrong. Because of her lingering questions about her child's death, each failure drove her back to her lawyer self, the one who knew that death was final. Yet she wanted the dreamer she had fallen in love with to show her differently. Nate leaned behind her and reached into the beach bag to pull out the plastic container that once held Diane's oil paints and brushes. Tonight it would serve a different purpose. Carol returned her gaze to the waves breaking on the shore. The memory of the day Diane died was ever present, more effortless to summon than anything they had tried at home with crystals or cards. Diane had left their house on a bright August afternoon a year ago. Carol was cooking when Diane came in, already dressed in her black one-piece and carrying her towel under her arm. Abby's having a pool party. I'll eat there. End of summer thing with some friends. No biggie. Love you, Mom. Love you too. Kiss, hug. Goodbye. Goodbye. Out went Di to her friend's party. But Carol knew she meant more to her daughter, who had just come out to them. Di had been seeing a social worker for what they called her dark moods since she hit puberty. The Hesters convinced themselves her depression was more chemical than anything to do with them. Abby Wexman would recount later that she thought it was a large branch that had come down from one of the trees, but coming closer, there was no mistaking the shape in the pool for anything else. 911 was called first, then Carol, who shot from her house and around the block to the Wexmans. EMTs had Diane surrounded when Carol burst into the backyard. Abby was there in shorts and a sweatshirt, apologizing, and Carol's last thought before the grass met her cheek had been, "Where the hell is your bathing suit? Where are the other kids?" She wondered now if there'd been a blue moon that night, too. "Get ready," said Nate. "I am ready," she snapped. Ants made of ice crawled down her exposed neck as the wind dipped. Instinctively, Carol looked out to the vast ocean and coughed. The hairs on her arms stood up, along with the ones on her neck as the thickness in her lungs lessened and she came back to herself. Saw a single light flicker the next time water pulled back from the shore. A teen jolted upright, finger trembling in the air. "There!" The word cut through the murmurs, and then, one by one, others saw it too. A dozen voices whispering the same word. There, 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 there. Glows popped into life by twos and threes as the Shea snails came, filling the soft sand with their brightness, a steady, determined gait. The color was not correctly captured on the clips Nate had shown her. Their trails weren't a soft, hazy white light blanketing the ground. It was a shimmering, vibrant blue. People were coming to the yellow tape, running across metal stakes stabbed into the sand with their phones held up. "No flashes," one of the security men shouted, pointing to someone in the crowd. When Carol looked for her husband, he was already gone. Then, there. Fast walking toward the taped-off area, shoulders back, arms pumping, he met up with the other bodies bunched against the thin barrier, threatening to spill themselves onto the brilliant sand. Nate's red hair made him stand out even as he tried to go unnoticed, and he must have thought he was stealthy as he ducked beneath the yellow tape. Nate wasn't the only one ignoring the guards, who appeared to have given up, and were now only trying to keep people in order as they broke the rules. The glow rendered all of them featureless as a shadow, and, from the ground, rose Port Shay's version of the Aurora Borealis. Sparkling, dancing ribbons of light that reached into the sky with an alarming ambition to overtake it. Somewhere, a baby cried. People called out names, walking among the snails whose colors gave the impression of responding, pulsing brighter, faster, snaring Carol's attention and causing her to lose sight of Nate again. The snails continued to emerge on the stretch of beach to the feverish joy of the crowd. Children were being brought over, which sent a thrill of unease through her. Before her lawyer brain could fully click in and reason along with it, there came Nate, breaking out from the consuming glow, rushing past a family because she assumed he'd caught sight of what he thought was a perfect specimen. For a moment, Carol was sure he was going to hit the man who had come to stop before one of the snails. The man opened his arms, "Be my guest," and Nate scooped the snail into the container. That thing was throwing light off in its prison like nothing else on the beach. Nate was ablaze in its brilliance by the time he was upon Carol. "I got one," he announced, a boyish smile on his face that Carol thought she would never see again. Carol kneeled by the hotel room bed and lowered to eye level with the thing in the container. It was about the size of a human hand, and the shell's exterior was creamy white with bands of cerulean blue running up to the spiraled point. Its glow was barely visible under the room's weak lighting, giving abrupt X-ray glimpses of the body coiled within. Tendrils hung out from where the mouth might be, wormy things longer than her fingernail that writhed as though it were still beneath the ocean, revolting and hypnotic. "This doesn't look like any snail." Carol wrinkled her nose and pulled back from the container. "Because it's not a snail, Carol." He came to sit on the bed and got out Carver's instructions. He smoothed out the paper's wrinkled body on the mattress, the damage done being stuck in his pocket. "The shell has to be empty," he muttered. "That's the first thing." The creature's eye stalks swayed towards Nate. "This is nuts," Carol said, not moving her eyes from the snail. "You're such a cynic, Carol." He didn't wait for her to respond. "I've seen things. I told you before. I've talked to people over the years. It's not all lies. If I felt that way, I'd have closed the site ages ago. I don't want to see you hurt. And you? If I thought it was possible, if I believed we could have her 1 second more to hold, to speak, to die." She sputtered out, hands flailing in the air as though the right words could be pulled down and used to make her point. He wasn't the only one left hollowed out. He didn't have a corner on grief, and he still hadn't answered the question she posed on the beach. "You don't think it was an accident," she said, turning it into a statement he had to agree with or refute. Instead of answering, Nate popped the latches off the container and removed the lid, which unleashed the snail's briny, fishy scent into the room. There was more to the smell, a deep aroma that was sweet and cloying, rotting. The thing was dying from the inside out. "Maybe you can ask her yourself." Carol balled her hands into fists. "I'm asking you." "Are you? It sure sounds like you're telling me, Carol." Nate cupped his hand and slid it beneath the snail, which offered no resistance as he lifted it from the container. She didn't understand how he could be so calm holding the thing when she was nauseous just looking at it. Carol glanced at her watch. "It's almost midnight." Nate started to wrap his fingers around the head of the slug. The gold band of his wedding ring winked as his hand enclosed its top. "I'm sorry," he said. He pulled, but it remained stubbornly adhered to its shell. "Are you talking to me or that thing?" "Di felt things intensely," he said, voice stilted. "We knew that. We got her help. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe she did it to herself, Carol. We'll be better after this, I know we will." All but the thing's eye stalks disappeared under Nate's grip. "Abby was her first crush," said Nate. "Did you realize that? Do you remember what it was like to get your heart broken? For someone like Di, it can be devastating. She needed more help, but we were too blind or stupid or I don't know what to see it." "You don't believe that?" Nate shook his head as though trying to rid himself of further thoughts. "I've got to focus. Let me focus." Carol jumped from the bed and stalked over to the beach bag. She ruffled through until she found the knife Nate had packed. He must have forgotten it was there or hoped for a bloodless outcome. "Make it quick," she said, handing over the blade. It felt like she was screaming. "They die anyway." Nate nodded at her as he accepted the small blade. Bristly curved teeth lined the underside of each tentacle, but the snail showed no aggression as its wormy mouth probed Nate's palm. The thick blade penetrated the space between the snail and its shell, then released a splash of blue, stringy, bloody, and wet. Blue bled onto Nate's shorts, down his leg, and onto the carpet. Carol got some on her white summer dress. She thought she might puke when one of the snail's eyes glared at her, the stalk rigid in accusation before going limp and falling back. A flicker of blue light from the snail, a small shiny gasp that faded as its tentacles grew lifeless. Nate dug in deeper, his hands running with blue mucus, the small knife covered in ooze. Hard to believe the small thing could produce this much gore. He dropped the blade and the mollusk's remains into the bin, where it lay, still and dead. Seashell in hand, Nate lifted it as though about to offer a toast. Their eyes met over it. "What time is it?" Nate asked in a shaky voice. "Go on," urged Carol. "You have time." Nate was already up and headed into the bathroom. Carol was on his heels as he thrust the snail's shell under the faucet, cleaning it of remaining gunk. Inky blue splattered the pink sink. Carol glanced at his hands. His fingers were still a mess. If only it were blue paint. With a trembling hand, Nate brought the dripping shell to his ear and placed his stained fingers against the lips in warning. With a trembling hand, Nate brought the dripping shell to his ear and placed his stained finger against his lips in warning. He was framed like that, standing, fingers tightening on the spiral shell. Had the windows been so far open? She didn't know. She could only say that the room felt chillier, and the hotel clerk had warned it got cold at night because of the ocean's proximity. But this? A shiver moved across her neck as Nate's head angled toward the shell, and for a moment, Carol imagined his skull flattening and shrinking until it squeezed through the aperture. "Die," said Nate. "Diane," whispered Carol. "Carver said to use her full name." "Diane, it's Dad. Will you speak to me?" And again, "Diane, it's Dad." Carol had no concept of the time that passed while Nate held the shell to his ear and repeated softly, then loudly, their daughter's name. He'd done the same when they sat in the summoning circle they made in Diane's room, surrounded by her anime posters and photo booth snaps from some friend's party. And despite the crystals and candles, the result had been the same. This silence. She loved him enough to give him time to realize this on his own. She could wait a little longer. "Diane, it's Dad. Will you speak to me?" Nate switched the shell to his left ear like someone trying for better reception. "You're bleeding," cautioned Carol. "Nate, you're bleeding." It was true. A red line ran down his jaw, one streak then another, as a fresh cut was opened, where the shell's rough end sliced into his flesh. "Honey, it's Dad." He licked his lips. "Baby, I'm here. Will you come?" Carol moved to his side. The room temperature dropped. "It's Dad." "And Mom," put in Carol, because why not show Nate she was invested as much as him? "It's Mom and Dad. Will you speak to us?" Nothing, of course. No revelations, no voice from beyond, just more bullshit and the pieces of her husband she'd have to pick up and reshuffle into place. "I don't think she hears me," said Nate, and gulped a sob. His knees buckled, and Carol was there to catch him as he slumped, leaning on her. Carol took on his weight and led him out of the bathroom, back to the bedroom. "Give it to me, Nate, please, before you hurt yourself more." At first he wouldn't. If anything, her asking only made him push the shell firmer, doing more damage. "Please." So he did. Not with a shrug, although it might have looked like it to a stranger, but Carol knew better. It was a surrender. His white flag, the blood-smeared seashell. "She was there," whined Nate. But that was as much true as the folks who deluded themselves into thinking an empty shell was bringing them the ocean. No. Wishful thinking moved Nate, and it had to stop. Carol would see to it. She moved the container off the bed and lay down, legs dangling over the side. "Cover me." He did, up to the neck, with the hotel's stiff blanket. "This is the last time," she said, carefully putting the seashell to her ear. She had no intention of cutting herself up, thank you very much. She would see to Nate's wounds after this was done. After. Shut up. Don't. I'm sorry about your daughter, truly, but you need to stop bothering my child. Abby's mother, when Carol kept calling after the funeral to ask why her daughter had gone over there, why she had thought there was a party. If Abby had crushed her child's heart, if Abby had kicked her away like trash, or stop. Carol looked up at the chipped pink paint. Diane, she said to the ceiling, it's Mom. She blinked, and the ceiling wavered, no doubt a result of nerves. Is she there? Insistent Nate, stubborn Nate, dancing from side to side at the foot of the bed, arms close to flailing, unable to contain himself. Carol swallowed her reluctance, a heavy, loathsome stone in her throat, and chose to say nothing. The ceiling became a smear of blue, which must have been Carol's tears blurring her vision, a blue that rippled and wavered, vast, stretching from side to side and unconfined by the room's boundaries. She sniffled, and that hardness in her throat returned as part of her spoke up. Hadn't the ceiling been pink? Shadows flitted by Carol as she swayed on her feet. On her feet. She didn't remember standing. Nate? She spoke, and her query echoed as though she leaned over a well and was calling down into its bottom. Do you hear her? His voice sounded too far away. Instinct drove her eyes above where the moonlight speared the surface and a figure paced, fragile, as though it could be blotted out of existence with the next movement of the ocean blue. What looked like a raft, at the foot of which Nate nervously danced, had to be the bed where Carol still lay, seashell to her ear, head poking out from the top of the blanket. Mom? Every inch of whatever passed for Carol's body in this place froze at attention because she had heard the impossible. Mom! As she strained to hear her child's voice, small silvery fish played around Carol. They darted through her, tails flicking as they gained momentum and sped away, as if she wasn't there. Maybe she wasn't. Nate must have climbed onto the bed, as she couldn't see him, but when he spoke, his words dropped to her clearly. Tell her it's Dad. And Mom, muttered Carol. Your Mom and Dad. Adjusting to the dimness, Carol could make out rocky formations spanning the space ahead. Seashells ran up the rocks, all sizes and shapes, but it was an urgent stirring under the silt that seized her eye. A school of gleaming blue fish emerged from the seabed and rushed to blanket the seafloor. No, wrong shape, too bright. It would come to her if she stared longer. They would reveal themselves to her if she could only concentrate as they wormed through the bed of shells and made their way toward the algae-covered crags. I'm here, Mom. Though there was a difference in her pitch as it wavered, trembled, as unsteady as the creatures that swam around Carol's feet. She's here. Carol raised her fingers to her mouth, caught in shock, barely noticing that her hand shimmered, transparent, more outline than flesh and bone. She's here, Nate. Oh my God, she's here with me. At once, the curtain of uncertainty lifted and hope broke through that hard chunk of herself that had formed around her grief. If she'd been capable, tears might have come, and with them would slip free the cynicism developed since Diane left. Instead, there was only a warmth blooming inside, opening itself like a dark flower with blood-red petals, growing. Yes, Mom, your need called to me. It's so strong. A smile in her child's voice lit Carol up and expanded whatever was inside her with relief and overwhelming gladness. She pressed her hands to her chest and swayed towards Diane, weightless, sure that she could lift from the seabed and give herself over, reunited in this strange place and under the most bizarre circumstances. I'm sorry, baby, Nate said from above. Somehow, Carol could sense him leaning over her, wanting to rip the seashell away, which drove a spike of fear that he would steal Carol out of this moment before she had her chance with Diane. Tell her I'm sorry. I should have known. Ask her, Carol, tell her. Sorrow blurred his words, but they didn't erase the meaning that Carol felt acutely. Dad is sorry. She was drawn forward, carried by the moving carpet of stars, which weren't stars, but snakes made of twinkling blue stars, or was it blue stars stretched out into the shape of snakes? But what snakes had eyes like these on undulating stalks? What snakes had multiple squirming tongues that refused to be still? She knew them then. She knew them well. We should have seen the signs. We should have known how much she was hurting. She repeated Nate's words. Can she forgive me? Can you forgive me, Diane, said Carol, as the knot stars performed a reverse waterfall, flowing up to form a larger shape that eclipsed the outcropping behind it. She was now but feet away from the object, which gave off sharp glints as it whirled. A tornado beneath the sea. One last idea. One last traitorous thought that the snail's goop had emitted some substance that had set her tripping. Then, delicious need, whispered Diane. Strong. Can you forgive Dad? Oh, cooed Diane. Yes. The column gained momentum as more life flowed into it, filling, building, stretching out, pulsing a deep, dark blue. Your need, Mom, a breathy call. Give it. Ahead of her, the spout was no longer any recognizable shape. At its core, a throbbing muscle braided by the cerulean slugs. A dark thing. A hungry thing. Carol would not yield. Did you mean to do it, Diane? Carol had to pull herself to frame the question, to release it. Was it suicide? The question was a bleeding sore and it hurt. Oh, did it hurt. Mom, I need to know. Mom, said Diane. A voice changed, louder. I want to know the truth. I deserve to know the truth from you. Truth, murmured Diane, considering its weight and worth. The column swirled, brimming with bioluminescent things, and at its core, a shape trying to form. It twitched, raw muscle folding over itself, tightening, unfurling, something like a mouth but not made for speech. Are you really her? Tell me a memory, something we've shared, pleaded Carol. What do you remember? Too much. We recall too much, Mom. Carol's poise straightened as she came within feet of the kinetic storm. She felt its desire, its hunger. She raised her arm and reached out toward the spinning column. Round and round it went, and closer did her fingers come to touch, to be swept away, taken. Where are you, Diane? Show yourself to me. We're inside, said something within the storm. Come in and see, Mom. Tell me something. Believe, Mom. Trust. Except there was a distortion at the end of the word that should have come naturally from her daughter. Carol stopped. If she allowed Nate to continue with the shell, the trick might have gone on without a hitch, and Nate would have asked for his forgiveness and returned fulfilled as others had before him. If it wasn't Carol looking into the swirling, coalescing blue and seeing it for what it was. She started to say this, opening her mouth to accuse and unleash the unfairness, the sadness, the absolute disappointment, and yes, rage. At God, at Nate, at the thieves who stole from them with empty promises, and the snails leading them here to yet another. An explosion was set off behind her eyes within the confines of her see-through skull, and it guttered out as quickly as it had come upon her, leaving Carol resigned to what she had experienced. And tired. More than anything. Yet Carol felt the chaos inviting, tugging at her mind to stay and listen as the creatures could absolve her of her guilt, could cleanse her of any misgivings, and she could return to Nate, renewed for them both. It would be a lie, of course. We will give you the truth you want, it said, sensing her hesitation. Leave a little of yourself with us, is all we ask. Truth, sighed Carol. You can't, can you? She almost laughed at this lying charlatan who was eating her pain. You nearly had me. You will deny our gift? You don't have anything to give, she said plainly, not to her daughter, but to the multiplicity that was pretending its singularity. It seemed so clear suddenly, the facade. We must go. Then go, Carol said, turning away from the thing that had grown even larger, spreading out like a blue stain, refusing to hold steady, instead becoming massive, pregnant with the life it would spill out onto the sea floor and into the shells she saw there. This wasn't a graveyard, Carol realized. It was a nest. A pressure began around her head which she felt with hands that, as she observed, filled in with muscle, veins, nerves, and white bone rapidly. When she screamed at the pain, only bubbles escaped. Then you must go, it said, and pushed. Before the bond was altogether broken, there came a shrill laugh of something immense. A clap of leering thunder that stayed with Carol as life jetted back into her physical body and sent her bolt upright on the bed, coughing up briny water that she spat out and then coughed again. She didn't register Nate in the room with her. She only knew the shell remained in her hand and she was bleeding from her ear. To Nate's credit, he didn't ask her right away. He enveloped her in a hotel towel and cleaned up her ear. She did the same for him. Are you all right? He asked in bed when a decent amount of time had passed. Yeah, I think so. She wiped her mouth, which still tasted of the sea. Carol. She rolled over to face Nate. She heard you, she said, finding the strength to give him a half smile. For a second, Nate didn't react. His breath hitched, his body still as if bracing for a punch. Then he released a shaking, long breath, one that seemed to open something inside him while closing something else. His eyes welled up as he brought his hands to cover his mouth. When he finally looked at Carol, there was a lightness in his face. Oh, thank God. He took her in his arms, squeezing her too tightly. She allowed it. His body shook as he pressed his face against her neck. She heard you, she said again, softer. Maybe if she said it enough times, it would be true. He pulled her damp hair back and kissed her forehead. Thank God, thank God. The lie settled on her tongue, briny and thick. She swallowed, but the taste lingered. Thanks, Ed, for sharing that tragic and chilling story with us. I first read this story a little over a year ago in a critique group. I loved it then, and the changes you've made over the past 12 months have only made it stronger. I'm so glad we can help get it into the spotlight here on Sinister Soup. I love how this narrative delves into grief and questions we ask ourselves after losing a loved one. Those questions burrow into us, infecting us like a discarded shell and moving us to their own designs, no matter how hard we fight to undo their influence. Even more terrifying, perhaps, the answers we might receive, given the opportunity to truly ask those questions, to truly know why someone passed, what caused it, or any role that we might have played. I love those explorations of moral conundrum through the eyes and dynamics of character, and I really believe you pulled that off expertly with this one, Ed. Thanks again. And of course, thank you, listeners and readers. Without you, this podcast and imprint would not exist, and I, like Nate and Carol, would be merely muttering into the fathomless void. Alas, you are here, listening, and your need is so very sweet. You've been listening to Sinister Soup, an audio and online imprint of Grendel Press. I'm your host, Clay Vermolum, and we'll be back with another terrifying episode next month. Thanks for tuning in. Please stay tuned for an interview with this story's author. See you on the other side. Hello, listeners, readers of Sinister Soup. We're here with another author interview today with Ed Serken, the author of Show Yourself. Ed Serken, welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for submitting a story to us, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really happy to be here. Really happy to be part of this. Excited.
Yeah, that makes both of us, man. So, speaking of you and you being a part of that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you write? What does your writing journey look like? And what are you working on right now as a writer?
So telling about myself. So I am your typical middle-aged guy living in Long Island, doing my thing. I work for an advertising company, but I've always had a love for horror fiction of all kinds. Like I used to say, everything dark and creepy. I love all films, all books, everything. And I would say I've always been writing. Since I had a Smith Corona typewriter back in the day, I was always like pounding something out. Stories that my parents would be very much go, "Are you okay? Do you know what real is? Do you know that this isn't real?" And I'd be like, "Yes, I understand that." I grew up on Fangoria, Famous Monsters, all of that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, that really shaped how I write and how I think about writing. I feel like I'm a kid of the 80s, very
Mm-hmm.
much in the horror mold of, kind of, those guys like Clive Barker, Stephen King, Ramsey Campbell, being another author I really, really appreciate. But I try to write horror fiction that has a psychological bent. I never want to have characters who are um, black and white. I want you to kind of feel for them. I want them to be kind of gray,
Mm-hmm.
because that's, I like to and hope to try to keep the horrors grounded in some reality. And as far as what I'm working on right now, I'm actually working on, it's kind of funny. It's almost like a semi-autobiographical horror novella.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
and it really happened, which is I lost my brother I lost he basically went to Massachusetts, disappeared from my family kind of, and lost himself in conspiracy theories and all this other nonsense, and turned out actually went kind of turned into a paranoid schizophrenic, and was found frozen to death in his house. And based
Oh,
on that, and based of all the all that kind of like darkness and all that, I've kind of been trying to work through some of that trauma through the novella, which is tentatively called The Memorial.
okay. Well, shit, first of all, man, I'm really sorry to hear about that.
Yeah, thank you.
It, but I'm glad you're processing it in a creative and productive way for yourself. I find horror writing is very healing for that same reason. When you can kind of like tackle that darkness a little more head on through your art. At least that's how I see it.
I couldn't agree. Well, whatever the phrase is, I couldn't agree more. Because I mean that is part of it, is kind of getting the answers that you'll never get here. You kind of can get those answers, or ask those questions in an art form, which I think is very therapeutic. And really, people, it sounds like a cliche, but it's absolutely true. I when I'm writing about these kind of things about my relationship with my brother, which not to get too dark and do too into it, was very interesting, especially with my mother and so forth. It's a way for me to kind of grapple with some of the familial relationships and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and you bring up a great point too, even earlier when you were talking about your parents saying like this isn't real, or do you realize what's real? Like that's a funny joke, but also at the same time, like every something that's real to someone who's paranoid, that is fucking real, like in a way, and you can really explore those
Yeah.
unseen avenues in horror in a way that I think you can't in a lot of other genres. So kudos to you for taking on that. Pardon me.
Yeah.
Kudos to you for taking on that heavy burden. I mean, it really is. And to put that into a story, to put that into a novella, like that's hard work to work through that on your own. But I do think it's important work because it shows people that are in the same circumstances that they're not alone. It shows people that out in the world that are dealing with similar traumas and similar tribulations that other people have done it, and there are different ways to do it, and maybe the way you're doing it aligns with them and will show them that there is maybe a path through for them. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you for sharing that story, man. I mean,
absolutely.
that's
Yeah,
tough, but I appreciate it.
yeah. No, I'm kind of, I find that I'm always like kind of like, I have no problem like sharing more personal things. Like I'm not really a shunner. It's kind of like, that's it. I take
Hmm.
everything, and I hope some of my writing has this too. It's kind of like a dark humor to it. You know, not like a what's the name? Like a Douglas Adams type, absurdity, but just kind of like a sarcastic kind of bend to it, because that's kind of like how I take on the world. So
Yeah, irreverent maybe.
irreverent is a good word. That's the word. That's the one
I,
I'm looking for.
that's the one that resonates with me when I read your stuff. There's an irreverence to it, a
Yeah.
sort of tongue in cheek to it, that sees this darkness and kind of recognizes it for the aspect of reality that it is,
Yeah.
which is like it doesn't necessarily have to be something that we hide from. You can look at it a different way and make it a little less scary by doing so. But you do have to do that intentionally to some degree. And speaking of doing things intentionally, you wrote this story. I've liked it. I read it in a critique group like 2 years ago, I think, at this point, which is crazy, or a
Yeah.
year ago, I think. But regardless, I know you submitted it around, you sent it into Nightmare, and um, the whole point of Grendel Press's Sinister Soup imprint here is to give a life to like reprints and then stories that have been rejected a lot. So I'm really glad. I mean, I wish you would have gotten published in a big press. That would have been awesome. But I'm also glad that you finally found a home for it here. Can you tell me a little bit more about this story in particular? What aspect of the story are you most excited about? And how did this story come to be?
Couple of things. This story essentially started. There was a call, and I'm not even going to remember it, for stories that take place by the seashore, or something by the seashore, or by amusement parks that are on the waterfront, or just things by the docks, etc. And of course, in typical writer fashion, I was started writing it, and the call went by, and I missed it, and I was still writing. And so that was kind of the impetus. I was like, I want to write for this, but I didn't know what I wanted to write. And then at the same time, I kept listening to PJ Harvey, Down by the Water, which has a lyric in it where it keeps going, little fish, big fish, something like, come and bring my daughter, or, something along those lines. And, if somebody
Mm,
fact check me. But that's what I kept hearing was little fish, big fish, swimming in the water, come back here and bring me my daughter. And
mm,
so that line, even now it gives me a little chill. That line kind of sat in my head for a while. And then I kept thinking, well, what there's always that pull of the ocean. It is always that pull of the beach, being on the beach. And I'm sure I was, touching a lot of points where I would go down to the beach with my wife at night in Long Island, hopefully when less human. I'm not really a people person, although I do talk a lot. Introverted extrovert, I like to say.
mhm,
There weren't a lot of people at the beach at night, and we would like, sit on the sand, and we'd watch the water come in. And of course, you see the seashells, you see the kids picking them up, and I think all of that kind of gelled together into a idea of wanting to reach out to someone who's passed away, to find out a truth, to seek them out, um, wherever they are. And it always, to me, it always leads back to, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the answer you want, or that the person giving you that answer is who you think it will be.
yeah, right.
That also kind of resonated in my head quite a bit. And just the kid who was always obsessed with seashells. And then it became, okay, well, what would be in a seashell? Well, snails, mollusks, and then it was like, well, do they live underwater? Yes, they do. Then it became more of, what if those, it always turns into the what if, right? It always turns into, what could those creatures be like? What would they be capable of? Who do they answer to?
Hmm.
What right do we have to even intrude on them?
Yeah.
So all those kind of swirled. And I am, I'd say, a cautious cynic. So much like the main character, I kind of am very cynical, but I want to be proven wrong, kind of like Fox Mulder, right?
Yep. Yep.
I want to be proven wrong. So that also played into it, as well as just the love of, again, horror, creatures, and so that just resonated. I had to do something with monsters, of course, so I needed my own new monster, which
Yeah.
I hope I've created. I hope people get a sense of this new creature. And the thing I'm most excited about is I really like the ending that actually I came up with, because it doesn't, I think, end in a way you'd expect, because typically you have, the main character in a horror story usually it dies, falls victim to the horror, or there's some like grisly twist, etc. And I wanted it to be more of a, what would she want to do? What would she do, knowing that her husband, needs this closure, and in a way she kind of sacrifices her own worldview for his at the end, even though she knows, that it's a lie. She's willing to go with that lie because of the love she has for him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you accomplished that really well. I like this new ending better than the old one you used to have,
Yeah.
where it was the more typical horror
Yeah.
ending of her getting like drug into the depths essentially.
Right.
Um, and so I think this one is a lot more powerful. But also I think you accomplished really well this sense of careful what you wish for, in this story, that kind of old motif. But I mean, it's common in horror because so often, what are people seeking in not just horror, but most stories? They're seeking the universal human desires of legacy, closure, getting answers for a wrong from their past. And, you're touching on that stuff in this story of that wanting closure and wanting answers to like how this could have happened and why this happened. And that's like partly probably to absolve them of blame, the main characters of blame to some degree. But I think more than that, it's more of just like wanting to understand where their daughter's head was at before, she ultimately decided to, uh, whether she decided to take her own life. And then like, if she did, why would she do that? And what could they have
That's
done
Yeah.
differently and all that kind of stuff, So
Yeah.
there's a lot of questions in this story that ultimately remain unanswered. But I think you play with that really well, and you give us just enough to think that maybe we're on the right track. And it's interesting too, because I think you play with that nicely as well, having the mother be the one who contacts the entity rather than the father, because he would have totally just accepted it. And she's the cynical, skeptical one, so she does not accept it, and then we kind of see it for what it really is, which is fun.
It's so deep. I love it's good talking about it. Makes you feel like I actually did something good here. That's good. No. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because a lot of the rejections I got was like, there's a lot of good stuff here, but it's not right for us. And it's just really
Yeah,
interesting because you're kind of like, you know, I try to, write something that will appeal to folks, but I also want to write something that appeals to me as a reader too. And this is the
yeah.
kind of story that I would have, I hope I would have loved if I didn't even know myself reading, wrote it, that I would enjoy it. And that's kind of one of the things I always try to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you did good. It's a story I enjoy reading, which is why I published it.
I
And it's the first thing I read from you, so
Yeah.
I didn't really come into there with a bias about your writing. I like got along with you well enough at the workshop and in Gordon's write-in, but that didn't have anything to do with my selection. I just knew I liked this story
Yeah.
and I liked the vibe. So
I love that it has a home. I'm very happy. So thank you.
good. Me too, man. And it's going to be fun to read. It's a good story for audio. Not too many POVs and some fun. Like I'm going to try to do some fun underwatery stuff. So that'll be a good time. I guess you are actually audience listening to this since I have done that. So hopefully it played. We'll find out. Let me know in the comments if it didn't play. Um, third question here, Ed.
Yeah.
So, what unique traits, themes, and motifs typically define your writing style? We talked a little bit about the psychological aspects and some of the influence from 80s horror, but what specifically would you say you try to bring to stories that maybe make yours unique?
Um, it's hard for me to say. I can tell you that what I try to do, it really is the psychological angle. I do like, I find that, if I start to really, get put on the wool sweater and really analyze my writing, get the pipe out. I guess it's kind of like they're always kind of, my character is always looking for answers, and then sometimes unfortunately they don't get them, or unfortunately they do. And
Hmm.
that seems to be I've noticed that's a running motif in my writing. And also, I feel like there is a I want to say there's an emotion of caring. Like the characters do care about each other. I find that the best horror is horror in which you actually like the people, and
Hmm.
that you want them to actually, even if they don't survive, you kind of want them to survive, or you want them to, find the closure that they were looking for. And I hope to convey that as well. You know, I want you to fall in love with my characters, and I also want you again to like want the best for them, even if the it just doesn't turn out that way, because that's quite often the way it is in reality, right? Back to my mother and my father. Yes, I very well, very much know what reality is, and some of that intrudes as well into the right. Yeah,
No, and that's a great point. I think that does make your stuff unique is that aspect of sympathetic main characters. You see a lot of purposefully antagonistic main characters, anti-heroes. There's like a big movement for, resisting and punk horror right now, which makes sense given the times. But
yeah,
a lot of the times, those characters don't inspire a lot of sympathy or empathy. You can often empathize with their cause or sympathize with their cause, like, yeah, burn that shit down, that thing sucks, kind of thing. But definitely, it's not necessarily a person you would root for if they didn't have such a major cause going on. It's kind of like a
yeah,
Che Guevara syndrome, where it's like everybody thinks Che Guevara is cool because of what he was standing up against, but it's like at the end of the day, he was also like a killer,
right, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah,
and probably not like the nicest dude.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think you do a good job of creating that in a genre that does tend to thrive from anti-heroes and unlikable protagonists.
Yeah, and there are a lot of, I mean, they're terrific authors. I mean, but I mean, sometimes I just read them and I'm like, okay, yeah, he's a psychotic murderer. Okay, I get that. And then by
Yeah.
the end of the book, I think quite a few stories we forget, the change in the character. And sometimes I
Mm.
feel like you come to the end and you're kind of like, well, they're still a psychotic murderer and they killed a bunch of people, but what if not like I'm not looking for a moral lesson or anything, but I am looking for, what is the deeper character motivation, or, you know, um, change in the character, or change in the lands in how they've changed things. I guess is how I would put it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's always a balance you're walking, and it all. We talked about this on my podcast a few episodes ago. I don't remember who the guest was when we had this conversation, but we were sort of talking about making characters more sympathetic. And one of the main ways we see that happening is by how much of the effects of an action do you show and how much of the reason for the action do you show. And the
Mm,
more you show the reason, the more you're asking for sympathy. The more you show the effects, the more you're asking for like the audience to see the fallout or to see a flaw in your character or to see a negative character arc develop in
yeah.
whatever way. Like, for example, we don't see the inside of the Death Star really when it explodes, but like there was a lot of people in that thing, like, and
Yeah.
a lot of them were
Well,
probably just like janitors and computer
yeah.
technicians. And does the Death Star not have a daycare? It must, right? There's a lot of like people on there. There has to be a daycare in the Death Star. Well, not anymore. Luke Skywalker blew that thing up, and we
Yeah.
just focus on the X-wing pilots and everybody celebrating because that's the evil empire. Um, but as somebody who now I consider myself not an awful person, not, relatively speaking. But I live in the empire now. So, it gives you a little bit of a different perspective when you
Yeah.
think of it that
So
way.
so your readers can't see my sweatshirt, but my sweatshirt literally says "Make Orwell fiction again," and I, this,
That's a great sweatshirt.
which is, by the way, apparently a dangerous thing to wear in Long Island, in my part of Long Island, because a woman, and she'll end up in a story. Like, she just stopped. I was just walking, minding my own business, and she turned around, started screaming at me about how I'm living a world. And this is the interesting part. She's like, "You're living a world of lies. Do you want to go back to living a world of lies?" And I'm like, of course, in the moment, you're like, I mean, what I wanted to say, what I should have said, I realized I should have said, "Would you like a hug?" I should have offered her a hug. Of course, it's not what I said in the moment, but that's what I thought of later.
Sure.
Not proud of what I said at the moment, but I was like, that would have, as a writer, you always have a better comeback. So, could always write a story and have that, put that as your resolution versus what really happened. But I was just taken aback that a complete stranger felt compelled to scream at me in the street, because I'm pretty much wearing, I think, a pretty soft criticism
Totally.
of our current evil empire.
Yeah. you could be substantially harsher,
Yeah, and I do
and
have
more
those, but
upfront.
I'm only going to wear them at the protest. I decided, I'm like, when I go to protest, I'll wear that. That one's the are we great yet, with like a dumpster fire or something.
Right.
That's how I feel.
No, I definitely understand that. I agree
Yeah,
with that. Also live in an area where you have to choose your shirts tactically. But hey,
yeah.
everybody's gonna see what's really happening eventually. I just hope it's not too late,
Oh, yeah. Me too. Me
but
too. Me
you
too.
never know. Um,
But that's a good, segue, like why we write what we do, right? Because we get to,
exactly.
I mean, I think I touched on it. My brother had everything you would like. I'm reading up a lot about QAnon right now, and my brother had all the aspects of a QAnon guy without the politics,
Mm,
which is a thing. Like, there were quite a few people on the left who were very much into some of the conspiracy things, and so, like, he had things like and I didn't know it until obviously years later, but he was like, feared the 5G network. Where have we heard that before?
yeah.
Um, you know, Bill Gates is going to put microchips in our bodies with the vaccines. I was like, what is this? What is this crazy? I mean, we only learned after he died. It was crazy. I mean, but
Right.
yeah. But I'm just saying, it's kind of interesting. That's where we've gone. Is
Hmm.
we're moving into, not to get too philosophical, but we're moving back in time. Like, we're going back to, you know, uh, not believing in science and not believing in facts and proof, etc. It's like we've got all this great technology, and yet we're headed backward instead of forward.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's the cruel irony of the internet, right? I mean, it's all the information at your fingertips, but there's also the algorithm, and everybody kind of gets put in their bubble. And I mean, my wife and I talk about this all the time, but I don't know how many people just look at a top Google result, especially now that it's like AI compiled, and just assume that is the fact, that is the answer to their question. They
Yep.
don't double check. They don't like look at multiple articles. They don't even see where this AI got its information.
Right.
And that's really scary to me, because that means that AI is now determining what the truth is for like probably the majority of people about the majority of things. And that's terrifying. I mean, that's some like dungeon crawler Carl shit coming our way. And that's pretty wild, especially considering the people that are creating the AI is like the tech billionaires. And yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it's great. It's great fodder for horror stories. Or,
Yeah,
I mean, what was I mean? I was, like I said, I work in advertising, and we have to learn AI. Like, we have to.
naturally.
We
Yeah,
have
of course.
we have mandatorily be told, and as a writer, you're like, well, this ruins my. It's like you have to figure out how to use it so that you're not, becoming a slave to it. And
Right.
it's so far, I feel, I got to be honest, I feel very compelled to say my job is secure, because as using it like a thesaurus or a synonym finder, or you want to, like, I work in some medical advertising. If you have like long sentences and you're like, oh, it's a long day, just shorten the damn thing. It's like great, you know. But as far as for creativity, it's just not there. And also people have to realize this is the part that really annoys me. Okay, now I'm gonna get in my soapbox. It's not really AI. It
Hmm.
it's basically making a sandwich from everything that's out there.
Yeah.
So, you know, like my son will play with Mid Journey, and he's like 25, 26, and I'll be like, yep, that's Dark Souls. Yep, that's The Witcher. And all they did was smush it together, and now it's a new character,
Yeah.
but it's not. And it's going to be the same thing with writing. It's going to be the same thing, with all that stuff. It's not real AI. And also, if you're a video game guy, AI's been around for a very long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
At least this version of it anyway. Yeah.
right, right. So, and it's going to be, to me, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. And the more garbage that comes in, the more garbage comes out.
That's a good way
That's,
to look at it. That's
I
a
mean,
good way to look at
that
it.
is, if you actually get into it, they do talk. Some of the experts do talk about that, how the quality. Because think about it, like anything else, this is how things happen, right? It's going to go, okay, yeah, it's really expensive, then it gets cheaper, and as it gets cheaper, the quality will go down, so those models will go down. I mean, my company has its own AI model, and I can break it in 2 seconds. It can't do half the stuff that you want it to do. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's refreshing to hear from somebody who actually trains in it and learns it every day. I think a lot of what we hear is fear mongering, and from people who are justly afraid, are rightfully afraid of what's coming down the pipeline. It is weird and it is
yeah.
strange, and we all hate change. That is a human condition. But it's good to hear that. So, and another thing I would like to hear from you before we let you go today, Ed,
Yeah.
is what are some of the classic or current must-read names and stories in horror and dark fiction for you right now? We've talked a lot about a lot of these things. We've talked about some of the ways we can address our current fears, the fears of our past, the traumas of our past, and probably our apprehensions for the future through horror. And who are some of the people that you think do that best?
Um, I read a wide. I mean, like every other guy says this, right? I read a wide range, but I do read a wide range. I actually think there's a lot to be learned from a whole different host of authors. I do want to say to folks about AI. I don't want to. I also do not want to. What's the word? I don't want to lessen the fact that yes, it is going to take people's jobs, and I mean, it's a simple truth. So please don't think that I'm, trying to reduce the impact or not acknowledge that, because I do. Having said that, I think the Stephen King Night Shift collection still holds very, very strong to me. It's something that really, stayed with me my entire life. I have a battered copy of it somewhere on my desk right here. That is one collection I think is, essential to read. I also think Ramsey Campbell's Dark Companions, like all the stories in there, are gems in my opinion. Thomas Ligotti, the Nightmare Factory, collects a whole bunch of his stuff if you can get it for cheap. He's another one. There's just no one like him. But I also like Cormac McCarthy. Like things like the Blood Meridian. I think it was called Blood Meridian, or the Orchard Keeper.
Yeah,
Story,
great stories.
just fantastic stuff that stands on its own as horror. When you really think about it, like all the characters and the darkness, and he plays with so many motifs that are just amazing. Um, but I also like Glenn Cook. He's a fantasy writer. He writes the Black Company series, which also that actually started making me want to write a little more fantasy, dark fantasy. Which who knows? Eventually, we'll see. And I really enjoy these days Cassandra Claw. The Salt Grows Heavy. I'm looking at that on my bookshelf, and I'm kind of like, that was, to me, quite good. I really enjoyed that book too. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, pretty literary bent there for you, Ed. With Cormac and Cassandra for sure. Cassandra Ka writes some really, really beautiful prose, but it's
yeah,
dense
yeah,
as hell. So like if you go
uh,
into Cassandra Ka, be prepared for it to be very dense. She does remind me a bit of Cormac McCarthy, to be honest.
yeah,
Like if Cormac McCarthy came from a completely different background and perspective, which is cool though. I mean, they both have that lyrical prose
Yeah, yeah.
quality to their work and that sort of convoluted writing style that once you figure out you almost have to figure out how to read it, but once you do, I mean, it's super next level.
It really, yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think some of his older ones, like I'm gonna get Blood Meridian, The Orchard Keeper, Child of God. Everyone always points to that as like one of the most evil human beings. Those to me are more my favorites than the ones he started doing, like the more normal one, I guess, like all the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Blood. Yeah, Cities on the Plain, I believe it's called. That part of the trilogy he did. Um, yeah, and I used to be a very much of a big true crime nut. Anne Rule, for those who may know, The Stranger Beside Me, which was about Ted Bundy working a suicide hotline. I mean, you don't get more weirder than that. I mean, I can't imagine. You're thinking about killing yourself and you get Ted Bundy on the line. I'm sure he had some great feedback to help you. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah. Anyway, yeah, just lots of stuff. I mean, I could go on forever. James Elroy, I really like his stuff too. So
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
that gives people plenty to go out and search for. Go look up some of those authors, some of those works. I too would definitely recommend Cassandra Coffer if you like dense literary modern horror. And if you haven't read Cormac McCarthy, you must. He's one of the best writers of all time, in my opinion, and a must read. Like, you don't have to read everything by him, but you definitely should read Blood Meridian before you die, and The Road. The Road's
oh,
fantastic.
of course, The Road. Sorry, I forgot. I mean, The Road. Yeah, which I mean,
That's the one everyone knows. It's more
yeah,
mainstream,
that's
but
so
there's a
funny. I didn't
reason.
even think of it. Yeah, but yes, of course, The Road.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
those two are my favorites. I haven't read The Orchard Keeper, but I know it's in the same kind of time period as Blood Meridian, so I
yeah,
do want to read it, but yeah, I haven't
yeah,
gotten around to it yet.
yeah.
Definitely read Blood Meridian before you die. Fantastic, fantastic story. Um, but yeah, and you know what else you should read? You should read some Ed Serken stuff. Where else do you have stories, Ed? What else are you working on? You've got
Um,
your novella, but
yeah,
do you have any plans for other releases or anything?
not. I mean, you could find Tales to Terrify had another story of mine. I think it's like episode 638 or something.
Okay.
Yeah, called Unburied, which is about a guy with too much anxiety, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
That was pretty good. I mean, I enjoyed the way they you know set it up and whatnot. But yeah, I'm not the most prolific, so the novella has been taking up most of my time. And then I have a short story banging in my head, but I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with it yet.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no rush, right? You just got to go with your own
Yeah,
process and release at your own pace. So everybody's
yeah,
different that way.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, well, thank you so much for being on the show, Ed, and thank you so much for giving us an awesome story. We here at Sinister Soup really appreciate it, and I can't wait to read more from you, my friend.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you for checking it out. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed.
Well, yeah. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, readers, and we will see you next time on Sinister Soup. I've been Claver Mullum. Goodbye.